The morning sun broke through the thin curtains of a small apartment in the industrial town of Millbrook. Inside the cramped bedroom, 23-year-old Elena Martinez sat on the edge of her narrow bed, her fingers trembling as she held a worn piece of paper. The paper contained information about a talent competition called Rising Voices, a nationally televised show that had launched the careers of many unknown singers into stardom. Elena's room told the story of a woman who had very little in terms of material possessions but carried enormous dreams within her heart. The walls were bare except for a single poster of her favorite singer, a woman who had also come from nothing and risen to become a legend. On the small wooden desk near the window sat stacks of notebooks filled with song lyrics Elena had written over the years. Some pages were yellowed with age, dating back to when she was just a child sitting in her grandmother's kitchen, humming melodies while the old woman cooked beans and rice. Life had never been easy for Elena. She had grown up in a household where money was always short and struggles were always plenty. Her father had left when she was only 6 years old, disappearing one night without so much as a goodbye. Her mother, Rosa, had worked 2 jobs just to keep a roof over their heads. Elena remembered the exhaustion in her mother's eyes every night, the way she would collapse into bed only to wake up a few hours later and start the cycle all over again. Despite the hardships, there was always music in their home. Rosa had a beautiful voice, though she never pursued singing professionally. She would sing while doing dishes, sing while folding laundry, and sing lullabies to Elena every night before bed. It was from her mother that Elena inherited her love for music and her natural talent for singing. But unlike her mother, Elena had always been painfully shy. The thought of singing in front of others made her stomach twist into knots and her palms sweat. Throughout her school years, Elena remained invisible. She was the quiet girl who sat in the back of the classroom, the one who never raised her hand, even when she knew the answers. Other students barely noticed her existence, and teachers often forgot her name. She moved through the hallways like a ghost, speaking only when absolutely necessary. The few times she had attempted to join the school choir, her voice had frozen in her throat during auditions, coming out as nothing more than a whisper. Her shyness was not something she chose. It was something that lived inside her like a heavy stone, weighing down every social interaction. When people looked at her, she felt exposed and vulnerable. When they spoke to her, she struggled to find words. The idea of standing on a stage, under bright lights, with hundreds of eyes watching her, was the stuff of nightmares. Yet deep inside, in the most secret corner of her heart, she dreamed of exactly that. Elena worked at a small grocery store on the outskirts of town. Her job was simple, but exhausting. She stocked shelves, cleaned floors, and helped customers find what they needed. The pay was barely enough to cover her share of the rent and put food on the table. Every day felt the same. Wake up, go to work, come home, sleep, and repeat. The routine was suffocating, but Elena did not know how to break free from it. The only time she felt truly alive was when she sang. Late at night, when her roommate was asleep and the world was quiet, Elena would sit by her window and sing softly to the stars. Her voice, unheard by anyone, would float through the darkness like a prayer. She sang songs of hope, songs of heartbreak, and songs of dreams that seemed forever out of reach. In those moments, she was not the shy, invisible girl from the grocery store. She was something more, something powerful and beautiful. It was her roommate, a cheerful woman named Lisa, who had brought the flyer about Rising Voices into their apartment. Lisa had found it pinned to a bulletin board at the community center where she taught dance classes to children. She had grabbed it on a whim, thinking maybe she would audition herself. But then she heard Elena singing one night, her voice drifting through the thin walls like an angel's whisper. Lisa had stood frozen in the hallway, completely mesmerized. She had known Elena for 2 years, and not once had she heard her sing like that. The voice was extraordinary. It was raw and emotional, filled with a depth that seemed impossible for someone so young. When the song ended, Lisa wiped a tear from her cheek and made a decision. She would convince Elena to audition, no matter how long it took. The conversation that followed was difficult. Elena immediately refused, her face turning pale at the mere suggestion. She listed every reason why it was impossible. She was too shy, too unknown, too ordinary. People would laugh at her. She would freeze on stage. Her voice was not good enough. The excuses poured out of her like water from a broken faucet. But Lisa was persistent. She had seen something special in Elena, something that needed to be shared with the world. Night after night, she talked to her roommate about the audition. She told her stories of other performers who had overcome their fears. She reminded her that dreams were worth fighting for. Slowly, carefully, she began to chip away at the wall of fear that Elena had built around herself. 2 weeks before the audition deadline, something changed inside Elena. She was at work, stocking cans of soup on a shelf, when she overheard 2 customers talking. They were discussing their regrets, the things they wished they had done when they were younger. One woman said she had always wanted to be a painter but had been too afraid to try. Now she was 70 years old, and that dream had died with her youth. Elena felt those words pierce her heart like a knife. She did not want to be 70 years old, looking back on her life with regret. She did not want to wonder what could have been if only she had been brave enough to try. In that moment, standing in the soup aisle of a small grocery store, Elena made the most terrifying decision of her life. She would audition for Rising Voices. The days that followed were filled with anxiety and preparation. Elena practiced her song over and over, a simple melody she had written herself about finding light in the darkness. It was not a flashy song or a complicated one. It was honest and pure, just like her. Lisa helped her choose an outfit, a simple blue dress that Elena had owned for years. There was no money for anything new. But Lisa insisted that the dress was perfect. It was humble and real, just like the woman who would wear it. The night before the audition, Elena could not sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her heart pounding with fear. Every doubt she had ever had screamed at her to stay home, to remain invisible, to give up. But somewhere beneath the fear, a small voice whispered something different. It whispered that she was meant for more than stocking shelves and being forgotten. It whispered that her voice deserved to be heard. As the first light of dawn crept through her window, Elena rose from her bed. Her hands were shaking, and her stomach was churning, but her decision was made. Today, she would face her greatest fear. Today, she would either rise or fall. But either way, she would no longer hide. The audition venue was nothing like Elena had imagined. It was a massive convention center in the heart of the city, nearly 3 hours away from Millbrook by bus. Hundreds of people had gathered outside the building, each one hoping to be discovered, each one carrying their own dreams and fears. The lines stretched around the block, filled with young hopefuls in expensive outfits. Some accompanied by vocal coaches and managers, others surrounded by supportive family members holding signs and banners. Elena stood alone at the back of the line, feeling more out of place than she had ever felt in her life. She wore her simple blue dress, the one she had owned for years, now slightly faded from countless washes. Her hair was pulled back in a plain ponytail, and she wore no makeup except for a light touch of lip gloss that Lisa had insisted upon. Around her, the other contestants sparkled like diamonds, their outfits glittering, their confidence radiating like the sun. The woman in front of Elena was a striking blonde in her early 20s, dressed in a designer outfit that probably cost more than Elena earned in 3 months. She had a professional headshot stapled to her application and spoke loudly on her phone about her agent and her previous television appearances. When she turned around and noticed Elena standing behind her, her eyes traveled up and down with obvious judgment. "First time auditioning?" the blonde asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Elena nodded, her voice caught in her throat. The blonde smiled, but it was not a kind smile. "That's sweet. Good luck, honey. This business is not for the faint of heart." She turned back around, dismissing Elena as easily as one might dismiss a fly. The hours of waiting were torture. The sun grew hot, then disappeared behind clouds. Elena's feet ached from standing, and her anxiety grew with each passing minute. She watched as other contestants chatted and laughed with each other, forming instant friendships based on their shared dreams. Nobody approached her. Nobody even seemed to notice she was there. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Elena made it inside the building. The interior was chaotic, filled with production assistants running around with clipboards, camera operators setting up equipment, and contestants warming up their voices in every corner. Elena was given a number, 847, which was pinned to her dress with a safety pin. She was then directed to a large waiting room, where she would stay until her number was called. The waiting room was like a pressure cooker of nerves and ambition. Some contestants paced back and forth, muttering lyrics under their breath. Others sat in corners, their eyes closed, trying to find inner peace. A few were crying, having already auditioned and been rejected. Their tears served as a harsh reminder of what awaited everyone who walked through those doors. Elena found an empty chair in the corner and sat down, trying to make herself as small as possible. Her hands gripped her application form so tightly that the paper began to wrinkle. She could feel her heart beating in her ears, a steady drumbeat of fear that threatened to overwhelm her. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to run, to escape, to return to the safety of her invisible life. But she stayed. The hours passed slowly. Elena watched number after number being called, watched hopeful faces walk toward the audition room, and watched devastated faces return. For every person who emerged with a golden ticket that meant they had passed to the next round, there were dozens who walked out empty-handed, their dreams shattered. When number 847 was finally announced over the loudspeaker, Elena's legs felt like they were made of stone. She rose slowly, her entire body trembling. A production assistant guided her down a long hallway toward the audition room. Along the way, she passed walls covered with photos of previous winners, their smiling faces a testament to what was possible for those who succeeded. The audition room was smaller than she expected, but the three judges sitting behind a long table seemed larger than life. There were 2 men and 1 woman, all of them famous in the music industry. Elena recognized them from television, from magazine covers, from the countless interviews she had watched while dreaming of this moment. Now they sat before her, their expressions neutral, waiting to judge her worth. Number 847. One of the producers announced. Elena Martinez. From Millbrook. One of the judges, a man known for his harsh criticism, looked up from his papers. Millbrook? Never heard of it. It is a small town, Elena managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. About 3 hours from here. The judge nodded without interest. And what will you be singing for us today? A song I wrote myself, Elena replied. It is called Light in the Shadows. The judges exchanged glances. Original songs were risky at auditions. Most contestants chose popular covers that the judges already knew and loved. Writing your own song was a gamble, especially for an unknown performer with no track record. The female judge, a former pop star with several hit records, leaned forward. You wrote it yourself? Interesting. Go ahead whenever you are ready. Elena took a deep breath and opened her mouth to sing. But in that moment, something terrible happened. Her voice, the one that had soared so beautifully in the privacy of her bedroom, caught in her throat like a fish in a net. What came out was weak and shaky, a pale shadow of what she knew she could do. She stopped and tried again, but the result was the same. Fear had seized her vocal cords and refused to let go. In the corner of the room, several other contestants who had been watching through a side door began to snicker. The blonde woman from the line was among them, her hand covering her mouth as she whispered something to the person next to her. Laughter rippled through the small crowd. The harsh judge held up his hand. Stop. Just stop. His voice was cold and dismissive. I have heard enough. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. This was exactly what she had feared. Exactly what she knew would happen. She was a fool to think she could do this. Let me try again, she pleaded, her voice cracking. Please. I can do better. The judge shook his head. I am sorry. But this is a competition for professionals. You seem like a nice girl, but you are clearly not ready for this level of performance. Perhaps you should consider other career options. The words hit Elena like physical blows. She wanted to sink into the floor, to disappear, to cease existing entirely. The snickers from the corner grew louder, and she could hear fragments of whispered mockery. Did you see her dress? She looks like she works at a grocery store. But then something unexpected happened. The third judge, a quiet man who had not spoken yet, held up his hand. He was a legendary producer who had discovered some of the biggest names in the music industry. His silence during auditions was famous, as were his rare interventions. Wait, he said, his voice calm but commanding. Give her another chance. The harsh judge looked annoyed. Marcus, come on. We have seen hundreds of auditions today. She clearly does not have what it takes. Marcus ignored him and looked directly at Elena. There was something in his eyes, something that looked almost like recognition. The song you wrote, he said slowly. You said it is called Light in the Shadows. Tell me what it is about. Elena swallowed hard. Her heart was still pounding, and her hands were still shaking. But there was something about the way this man looked at her that made her want to try again. He seemed to see past her nervous exterior, past the plain dress and the trembling voice, to something deeper inside. It is about my mother, Elena heard herself saying. She raised me alone, working 2 jobs, sacrificing everything so I could have a better life. The song is about finding hope even when everything seems dark. It is about the people who love us being the light that guides us through. Marcus nodded slowly. Close your eyes, he instructed. Forget about us. Forget about the cameras. Forget about everything. Just think about your mother. And sing. Elena hesitated for a moment, then did as he said. She closed her eyes and let the world around her fade away. She thought about her mother, about those tired eyes and that beautiful voice, about all the sacrifices and all the love. She thought about the dark nights and the small victories, about the dreams that had been passed from mother to daughter like precious heirlooms. And then she began to sing. The first note that left Elena's throat was soft, almost hesitant, like a bird testing its wings before taking flight. But as the melody began to flow, something magical started to happen. Her voice grew stronger, richer, filling the small audition room with a sound that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the physical world. The song started simply, with gentle notes that spoke of darkness and struggle, of nights spent wondering if tomorrow would be any better. Elena sang about a child watching her mother work until her hands were rough and her back was bent, about the silent tears shed when no one was watching, about the weight of poverty that pressed down on their small family like a mountain of stone. But then the melody shifted. The darkness gave way to something brighter, something hopeful. Elena sang about the moments of joy that existed even in the hardest times, the way her mother would dance in the kitchen when her favorite song came on the radio. The bedtime stories, whispered in the dark, the warm hugs that said everything would be okay, even when the world suggested otherwise. Her voice rose and fell like waves on an ocean, carrying with it all the emotion she had kept buried inside for so many years. Every note was filled with truth, every word dripping with authenticity. This was not a performance designed to impress. This was a window into a human soul, an invitation to feel what she had felt, to see what she had seen. The snickering in the corner stopped. The blonde woman who had mocked Elena earlier stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, her eyes wide with disbelief. The production assistants, who had been busy with their clipboards, lowered them, drawn in by the power of the voice filling the room. Even the camera operators, who had seen thousands of auditions, found themselves pausing to listen. The harsh judge, who had been ready to dismiss Elena just moments ago, leaned back in his chair with an expression of complete shock. His arms were crossed, but his body language had changed entirely. The annoyance was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like wonder. Beside him, the female judge had tears streaming down her face, making no effort to wipe them away. And Marcus, the legendary producer who had given Elena a second chance, sat perfectly still. A small smile played at the corners of his lips, the smile of a man who knew he had just discovered something extraordinary. He had spent decades searching for voices like this, voices that could touch the human heart in ways that defied explanation. In his long career, he had found only a handful of them. Now, standing before him in a faded blue dress, was another. Elena reached the climax of her song, her voice soaring to heights that seemed impossible. The final verse spoke of gratitude and love, of a daughter's promise to make her mother proud, to be the light that Rosa had always been for her. The last note hung in the air like a prayer, beautiful and pure and heartbreaking. And then there was silence. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The room seemed to hold its breath, as if afraid that any sound might break the spell that had been cast. Elena stood with her eyes still closed, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths, her cheeks wet with tears she did not remember crying. The first sound that broke the silence was applause. It started with Marcus, who rose slowly from his chair, clapping with deliberate, measured appreciation. The female judge followed, standing and applauding through her tears. The production assistants joined in, then the camera operators, then even the contestants who had been watching from the corner. The harsh judge remained seated for a moment longer, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. Then, slowly, he too began to clap. It was a reluctant acknowledgement, but an acknowledgement nonetheless. In all his years of judging talent competitions, he had never been so wrong about a contestant. Elena opened her eyes to find the entire room on their feet. The applause echoed off the walls, filling her ears with a sound she had never expected to hear. For a moment, she was not sure if she was dreaming. Things like this did not happen to girls like her. They happened in movies, in fairy tales, in the fantasies of those who dared to dream bigger than their circumstances allowed. The female judge spoke first, her voice thick with emotion. In 15 years of doing this, I have never heard anything like that. Your voice is not just beautiful, it is transformative. When you sing, you take people somewhere else, somewhere deep inside themselves. That is an extraordinary gift. The harsh judge cleared his throat, looking almost embarrassed. I owe you an apology, he said, the words clearly difficult for him to speak. I judged you before I heard you. And that was wrong. What you just did was remarkable. You have a voice that most singers spend their entire careers trying to develop and never achieve. It was raw, it was real, and it was incredibly moving. Elena could barely process what she was hearing. She stood, rooted to the spot, her hands still trembling, her heart still racing. All her life, she had been invisible. All her life, she had been told, either directly or through silent dismissal, that she was not special, that she did not matter. Now these famous judges, these people who had seen thousands of performers, were telling her that she had something extraordinary. Marcus walked around the table and approached Elena. There was a warmth in his eyes that felt almost fatherly. I have been doing this for 40 years, he said softly. And I can count on one hand the number of times I have heard a voice like yours. What you have cannot be taught. It comes from somewhere deep inside, from experience and pain and love. Do not ever let anyone make you feel like you do not belong here. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a golden ticket, the symbol that meant Elena had passed to the next round. Welcome to Rising Voices, he said, pressing the ticket into her trembling hands. The room erupted in cheers. Production assistants rushed forward to congratulate her. Camera operators repositioned to capture her reaction, and even some of the contestants who had been watching came forward with genuine praise. The blonde woman who had mocked Elena earlier lingered at the edge of the crowd, her expression unreadable, before quietly slipping away. Elena looked down at the golden ticket in her hands, hardly able to believe it was real. She thought about the long bus ride to get here, about the hours of waiting in line, about the moment when her voice had frozen and she had been ready to give up. She thought about all the years of hiding, of being invisible, of singing only when no one could hear. And now, in this small audition room in a convention center far from home, everything had changed. She wanted to call her mother immediately, to share this unbelievable news. But the production team had other plans. They needed to film her reaction, to capture her journey for the television audience who would eventually watch. Elena was led from the audition room to a small interview area, where a young woman with a microphone asked her how she felt. "I do not have words," Elena said, her voice still shaky. "I came here expecting to fail. I came here thinking that everyone who ever told me I was not good enough was right. And then something happened when I closed my eyes. I stopped thinking about what people might say. I stopped worrying about failing. I just thought about my mother. And the music came." The interview lasted several minutes, with Elena sharing her story in brief, emotional fragments. She talked about growing up poor, about her mother's sacrifices, about her lifelong battle with shyness. The production team recorded every word, knowing that this was the kind of story audiences loved. An underdog, a Cinderella, a nobody who had the potential to become somebody. When the cameras finally stopped rolling, Elena found a quiet corner and pulled out her phone. Her hands were still shaking as she dialed her mother's number. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before Rosa's tired voice answered. "Elena? Is everything okay? How did it go?" Elena opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, she began to cry. Not tears of sadness, but tears of overwhelming joy and disbelief. Through her sobs, she managed to choke out 3 words that would change both their lives forever. "I made it." On the other end of the line, 3 hours away in the small town of Millbrook, Rosa Martinez dropped to her knees in her tiny kitchen and began to pray. Her daughter had taken the first step toward her dream. The journey was far from over, but the impossible had become possible. And somewhere in the convention center, Marcus, the legendary producer, was already making phone calls. He had discovered something special, and he intended to make sure the whole world knew about it. The weeks following the audition passed in a blur of activity that Elena could barely comprehend. The show's production team contacted her with details about the next round, which would be filmed in Los Angeles, a city she had only seen in movies and television shows. They would cover her travel and accommodation, a kindness that made her weep with relief, since she could never have afforded such expenses on her own. Back in Millbrook, word of Elena's success spread quickly through the small community. The grocery store where she worked suddenly became a place of interest, with customers coming in specifically to meet the girl who might become famous. Her manager, a stern woman who had rarely spoken to Elena beyond giving orders, suddenly became friendly and supportive. She gave Elena time off to prepare for the competition, and even offered to hold her job until she returned. Lisa, her roommate, was over the moon with excitement. She had always believed in Elena, even when Elena had not believed in herself. Now she appointed herself as unofficial manager, coach, and cheerleader. She researched the competition online, studied the past winners, and created a preparation schedule that she insisted Elena follow religiously. But the excitement was matched by an equal measure of fear. The next round of Rising Voices was not a private audition in front of 3 judges. It was a live performance in front of a studio audience of 3,000 people, not to mention the millions who would eventually watch on television. The thought made Elena physically ill. She spent sleepless nights pacing her small bedroom, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake by entering this competition. Her mother came to visit a week before Elena was scheduled to leave for Los Angeles. Rosa took 2 days off work, something she almost never did, and traveled by bus to see her daughter. When she walked through the door of Elena's apartment, both women burst into tears and held each other for a long time without speaking. That evening, they sat together on Elena's narrow bed, just as they had done when Elena was a little girl. Rosa held her daughter's hands and looked into her eyes with an intensity that Elena had rarely seen. "I need to tell you something," Rosa said, her voice heavy with emotion. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." Elena waited, her heart pounding with unexpected anxiety. Rosa took a deep breath. "When I was young, maybe a year older than you are now, I had a chance to pursue singing. A talent scout heard me singing at a church event and offered to help me get started in the music business. He said I had real potential, that with the right training and opportunities, I could make something of myself." Elena stared at her mother in shock. In all her years, she had never heard this story. "What happened?" she asked, Rosa's eyes filled with tears. "I was too afraid. I was young and poor and terrified of failure. I told myself that girls like me did not become singers, that it was a foolish dream that would only lead to heartbreak. So I said no. I let fear make my decision for me, and not a day has gone by that I have not regretted it." She squeezed Elena's hands tightly. "I do not want you to make the same mistake I made. I do not want you to spend the rest of your life wondering what could have been. You have a gift, Elena. A gift that I passed to you, and that you have made something beautiful. Do not let fear take it away from you." The conversation changed something inside Elena. For so long, she had seen her shyness as a permanent part of who she was, an unchangeable aspect of her personality. But now she realized that fear was a choice. It was a voice in her head that she had been listening to for too long. She could choose to listen to a different voice. A voice that believed in possibility rather than failure. The flight to Los Angeles was Elena's first time on an airplane. She sat by the window, watching the clouds pass below like mountains of cotton. The world looked so different from up here, so vast and full of possibilities. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what life could be like if she succeeded. Not fame for its own sake, but the ability to share her music with people, to touch hearts the way music had always touched hers. The hotel where the contestants stayed was nicer than any place Elena had ever slept. The bed was soft, the sheets were clean, and the bathroom had hot water that never ran out. Small luxuries that most people took for granted felt like miracles to someone who had grown up with so little. She spent her first night just lying on the bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince herself that this was really happening. The next morning, she met the other contestants who had made it through the first round. There were 50 of them, all talented, all hungry for success. Some were professional singers who had been performing for years. Others were classically trained musicians with impressive credentials. A few, like Elena, were unknown dreamers who had somehow caught the attention of the judges. The blonde woman from the original audition was there. Her name was Veronica Hart, and Elena learned that she had already released 2 independent albums and had a substantial following on social media. She was one of the favorites to win the competition, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who expected to succeed. When Veronica saw Elena, her expression flickered with recognition. "Oh, you made it," she said, her voice neutral but her eyes cold. "I have to admit, I did not see that coming. Your little song was quite the surprise." Elena did not know how to respond, so she simply nodded and walked away. She had no interest in making enemies, but she also was not going to let anyone intimidate her. Not anymore. The rehearsals began immediately. Each contestant was assigned a vocal coach, a staging director, and a team of stylists who would transform them into television-ready performers. Elena's team was led by a kind woman named Margaret, who immediately recognized the challenges they would face. Elena had natural talent, but she had no experience performing on stage. Her body language was closed off, her eye contact was minimal, and she moved like someone who was trying to disappear rather than captivate. "We have a lot of work to do," Margaret said honestly. "But I see something special in you." The same thing Marcus saw. "We are going to bring it out. I promise." The days that followed were exhausting. Elena worked from early morning until late at night, practicing not just her singing but her stage presence, her walk, her smile, her ability to connect with an audience. It was uncomfortable and awkward, especially for someone who had spent her whole life avoiding attention. But slowly, gradually, she began to improve. She also began to discover that her story resonated with people. The production team had filmed a segment about her background, interviewing Rosa in Millbrook, showing the small apartment where Elena grew up, telling the story of a shy girl who had hidden her voice for years. When the other contestants saw the footage during a group screening, several of them approached Elena with genuine warmth. "I had no idea," one young man named Derek said. "I thought I had it hard growing up, but your story puts things in perspective. I am rooting for you." Even some of the professional singers, who might have seen Elena as beneath them, were moved by her background. The competition was fierce, but there was also a sense of camaraderie among many of the contestants. They were all chasing the same dream, and most of them understood what it meant to sacrifice for music. Not everyone was supportive, of course. Veronica and a small group of her allies made subtle comments about Elena's lack of experience, her simple clothes, her quiet demeanor. They whispered among themselves when she walked by, and occasionally laughed at inside jokes that were clearly meant to exclude her. Elena tried not to let it bother her, but the old feelings of invisibility and inadequacy sometimes crept back in. The night before the live show, Elena could not sleep. She lay in her hotel bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with fears and doubts. What if she froze on stage? What if her voice betrayed her again? What if all these people who believed in her were about to be disappointed? She got out of bed and walked to the window. The city of Los Angeles stretched out below her, a sea of lights extending to the horizon. Somewhere out there, millions of people were living their lives, facing their own fears, chasing their own dreams. She was just one of them, a small person in a big world, trying to find her place. She closed her eyes and thought about her mother's words. "Do not let fear make your decision." She thought about all the years of hiding, all the songs sung only to empty rooms, all the dreams kept locked inside. She had come too far to turn back now. Tomorrow, she would step onto that stage. Tomorrow, she would face her greatest fear. And whatever happened, she would do it with her head held high. She was done being invisible. The day of the live show arrived with the force of a hurricane. The studio was a chaos of activity, with hundreds of people rushing about, setting up lights, testing microphones, applying makeup, and managing countless details that went into producing a major television event. Elena moved through it all in a daze, her body going through the motions while her mind screamed with terror. She was scheduled to perform 7th out of the 50 contestants. The order had been determined by lottery, and Elena was not sure if her position was good or bad. Early enough that the audience would still be fresh and attentive, but late enough that the pressure of watching others perform would build. The backstage area was a mix of nerves and excitement. Some contestants were doing vocal warm-ups, their strange sounds filling the air. Others were meditating or praying, seeking whatever inner peace they could find. A few were laughing and joking, using humor to mask their anxiety. Elena sat alone in a corner, her eyes closed, trying to remember how to breathe. Margaret, her coach, found her there an hour before the show. She knelt down beside Elena and took her hands gently. "Listen to me," she said in a calm, steady voice. "I know you are scared. Everyone is scared. That is perfectly normal. But I have watched you these past weeks, and I have seen you grow into something remarkable. The talent was always there, but now you have the confidence to show it. Trust yourself. Trust your voice. And most importantly, trust your story." The words helped, but they could not erase the fear completely. Elena nodded and tried to smile, though it felt more like a grimace. Margaret squeezed her hands once more and then left to attend to her other responsibilities. The show began with a spectacular opening number featuring the host and a live band. The audience of 3,000 people roared with approval, their energy filling the massive studio. Elena watched on a monitor backstage, marveling at the scale of everything. This was real. This was happening. In less than an hour, she would be standing on that stage. The first contestant was a young man with a powerful rock voice. He delivered an energetic performance that had the crowd on their feet. The judges praised him warmly, and he walked off stage with a look of pure joy. The second contestant, a classical soprano, was equally impressive. Each performance seemed better than the last, and Elena felt her confidence shrinking with every passing minute. When it was Veronica's turn, she absolutely commanded the stage. She moved with the grace of a professional, her voice pitch-perfect, her presence magnetic. The audience adored her, and the judges gave her their highest praise yet. As she walked off stage, she passed Elena and allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. "Good luck," Veronica said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Try not to freeze." The comment was designed to shake Elena, and it nearly succeeded. She felt her heart rate spike and her hands begin to tremble. All the old doubts came rushing back like a flood. She was not good enough. She did not belong here. She was going to humiliate herself in front of millions of people. And then, something unexpected happened. Derek, the young man who had told Elena he was rooting for her, appeared at her side. "Hey," he said quietly. "Do not listen to her. She is scared of you, and that is why she is trying to get in your head. I heard you practicing yesterday. You were incredible. Now go out there and show everyone what you can do." Before Elena could respond, a production assistant called her name. It was time. The walk from backstage to the stage felt like the longest journey of her life. Each step seemed to take an eternity. The noise of the crowd grew louder, the lights grew brighter, and the reality of what she was about to do became increasingly impossible to ignore. She could feel thousands of eyes turning toward her, could sense the judgment and expectation that filled the air. The host introduced her with enthusiasm, sharing highlights from her background package. The audience responded with polite applause and curious murmurs. Here was the shy girl from the small town. The one with the mother who worked 2 jobs. The one who had frozen at her audition before delivering a stunning surprise. They were intrigued, but not yet convinced. Elena walked to the center of the stage and took her position. The spotlight hit her like a physical force, blinding her momentarily. She could not see the audience, could not see anything beyond the bright white light. For a terrifying moment, she felt completely alone, suspended in a void of fear and uncertainty. The music began, the opening notes of her original song filling the stadium. Elena opened her mouth to sing, and for a heartbeat, nothing came out. The nightmare was repeating itself. Her voice was frozen, trapped somewhere deep inside her chest. The audience shifted uncomfortably. One of the judges leaned forward with concern. The moment stretched into what felt like hours, and then Elena closed her eyes. She thought about her mother, sitting in their small apartment back in Millbrook, watching on television, praying for her daughter's success. She thought about all the years of sacrifice, all the meals skipped so that Elena could eat, all the dreams deferred so that Elena could have a chance. She thought about the church where Rosa used to sing, the kitchen where they used to dance, the bedtime stories whispered in the dark. The first note emerged like a bird set free from a cage. It was soft and tentative, but it was there. And as Elena continued, her voice grew stronger, fuller, more confident. The fear did not disappear, but she sang through it, using it as fuel rather than letting it become an obstacle. The song unfolded like a flower blooming in real time. Elena sang about darkness and light, about struggle and hope, about a love so deep that it could illuminate even the blackest night. Her voice filled the stadium, reaching into corners and touching hearts. People who had come expecting entertainment found themselves experiencing something far more powerful. In the front row, a woman began to cry. Behind her, a man who had not shed tears in decades felt something wet on his cheeks. Throughout the audience, people were moved in ways they could not explain. This was not just singing. This was a soul speaking directly to other souls. The judges sat transfixed. Marcus, who had given Elena her second chance at the audition, wore an expression of proud satisfaction. The female judge clutched a tissue to her face, her makeup ruined by tears. Even the harsh judge, who was famous for his poker face, seemed visibly affected. Elena reached the climax of the song, her voice soaring to impossible heights. The notes hung in the air like stars, beautiful and eternal. She poured everything she had into those final moments, every ounce of emotion, every dream, every fear, every hope. This was her story, her truth, and she was sharing it with the world. The last note faded into silence. For a moment, nothing happened. The audience sat in stunned stillness, as if awakening from a dream. Then, like a wave building from the shore, the applause began. It started at the front and rolled backward, growing louder and louder until the entire stadium was on its feet. The standing ovation lasted for over 2 minutes. People were cheering, crying, shouting words of praise that Elena could not quite make out over the roar. She stood in the center of the stage, tears streaming down her face, unable to believe what was happening. The judges were the last to speak. The harsh judge went first, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. "I have been doing this for a long time," he said, "and I thought I had seen everything. But what you just did was beyond anything I expected. You took a simple song and turned it into a transformative experience. That is the mark of a true artist." The female judge could barely speak through her tears. "You moved me in ways I cannot put into words. Your voice is beautiful, but it is your heart that makes it extraordinary. I will never forget this performance." Marcus stood up from his chair and began clapping again. "I knew from the moment I heard you that you were special," he said. "But even I did not know how special. What you did tonight was not just a performance. It was a gift. And I have no doubt that the whole world is going to fall in love with you." The audience erupted once more, their applause mixing with cheers and whistles. Elena stood in the spotlight, no longer afraid of being seen, no longer wanting to disappear. For the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged exactly where she was. Backstage, Derek rushed to congratulate her with a hug. Other contestants followed, offering genuine praise and amazement. Even some of Veronica's allies seemed impressed, their earlier mockery forgotten in the face of what they had witnessed. But Veronica herself was nowhere to be seen. She had watched Elena's performance from a monitor, her face growing paler with every passing moment. The woman she had dismissed as a nobody had just delivered the performance of the night. The competition had changed completely. Elena pulled out her phone to call her mother. Her hands were shaking, but this time it was from joy rather than fear. She had done it. She had faced her greatest fear and emerged victorious. And this was only the beginning. The days following Elena's breakthrough performance were overwhelming in ways she could never have anticipated. The show had aired nationwide, and the response was immediate and massive. Her performance became the most watched clip from that episode, shared millions of times across social media platforms. People who had never heard of Elena Martinez before were suddenly talking about her, writing about her, championing her as their new favorite. News outlets picked up her story. A shy grocery store worker from a small town who had frozen at her audition, only to deliver a stunning performance that brought judges and audiences to tears. It was the kind of underdog narrative that captured hearts and imaginations. Interview requests poured in from morning shows, entertainment magazines, and podcasts. The production team carefully managed her exposure, wanting to build momentum without overwhelming her. For Elena, the sudden attention was both thrilling and terrifying. She had spent her entire life trying to avoid being noticed, and now the whole country knew her name. Walking through the hotel lobby meant being stopped by fans wanting pictures. Checking her phone meant scrolling through thousands of messages from strangers, telling her how much her performance had meant to them. Some of the messages made her cry. A woman wrote about losing her mother to cancer and how Elena's song about a mother's love had helped her grieve. A young man shared that he had been struggling with depression, but that watching Elena overcome her fear had given him hope. A teenager from a poor neighborhood said that Elena's story made her believe that dreams were possible even for people who had nothing. The weight of these expectations was heavy. Elena realized that she was no longer singing just for herself or even for her mother. She was singing for thousands of people who had placed their hopes and dreams on her shoulders. The responsibility felt enormous. But it also felt meaningful. Her music was touching lives. And that was worth any amount of pressure. The competition continued over the following weeks. Each round eliminated more contestants, raising the stakes with every performance. Elena faced challenges she had never imagined. She had to learn new songs in short periods, adapt to different musical styles, and perform increasingly complex arrangements. Her team worked around the clock to prepare her, and she worked harder than she had ever worked in her life. Her relationship with the other contestants evolved as the competition progressed. Derek became a close friend, someone she could confide in and laugh with during the stressful moments. A few other contestants also became genuine allies, supporting each other even as they competed against one another. The experience created bonds that Elena knew would last long after the show ended. Veronica remained hostile. She had delivered consistently strong performances throughout the competition, maintaining her position as one of the frontrunners. But Elena's rise had clearly rattled her. The audience's passion for Elena far exceeded what Veronica received, and the judges seemed increasingly captivated by the shy girl who kept surprising them. One evening, Elena was practicing alone in one of the studio's smaller rehearsal rooms when Veronica walked in. The blonde woman stood in the doorway for a moment, watching, before entering and closing the door behind her. "We need to talk," Veronica said, her voice lacking its usual arrogance. Elena stopped singing and turned to face her. "About what?" Veronica hesitated, as if weighing her words carefully. "I have been watching you these past weeks. Watching how people respond to you. How the judges light up when you perform. I do not understand it. I have trained my entire life for this. I have taken voice lessons since I was 6 years old. I have recorded albums, performed hundreds of shows, built a following from nothing, and here you are, a grocery store worker with no experience, and everyone acts like you are the second coming." Her voice cracked slightly. "It is not fair." Elena considered her response carefully. Part of her wanted to be angry, to remind Veronica of all the cruel comments and dismissive looks. But looking at the woman before her, Elena saw something she recognized. She saw fear. She saw insecurity. She saw someone who had built their entire identity around being the best, and was now facing the possibility of being second. "I do not think music is about fairness," Elena said gently. "It is not about how long you have trained or how many songs you have recorded. It is about connection. When I sing, I am not trying to impress anyone. I am just sharing something real, something true about my life. Maybe that is why people respond. They can feel that it is honest." Veronica's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Everything I do is honest. I pour my heart into every performance." "I know you do," Elena replied, "and you are incredibly talented. But sometimes our hearts are guarded, even when we do not realize it. Sometimes we are so focused on being perfect that we forget to be vulnerable. The audience does not want perfection. They want to see themselves in us. They want to know that we struggle and hurt and hope, just like they do." The conversation seemed to affect Veronica deeply. She said nothing more, just nodded once and left the room. But in the performances that followed, something in her approach shifted. Her singing became less technically controlled and more emotionally open. The judges noticed, praising her growth. The audience responded with increased warmth. Elena did not know if her words had made the difference, but she was glad if they had. This competition had taught her that success did not have to come at someone else's expense. There was room for more than one star in the sky. The semi-final round arrived faster than Elena expected. Of the original 50 contestants, only 6 remained. Each would deliver 2 performances, after which the bottom two would be eliminated. The stakes could not have been higher. Elena had chosen her songs carefully. The first was another original composition, a song she had written about hope and resilience. The second was a classic ballad that had special meaning to her mother, a song Rosa used to sing while doing housework in their tiny kitchen. Her first performance went beautifully. The audience responded with another standing ovation, and the judges heaped praise upon her. Elena walked off stage feeling confident and grateful. One more performance, and she would be in the finals. But then, disaster struck. In her dressing room between performances, Elena received a phone call that shattered her world. Her mother had collapsed at work and been rushed to the hospital. The details were unclear, something about her heart, and the doctors were running tests. Lisa was there with her, but she could not say whether Rosa would be okay. Elena felt the ground shift beneath her feet. The competition, the millions of viewers, the career of her dreams, none of it mattered compared to her mother. She needed to be on a plane immediately. She needed to get home. She found the show's producer and explained the situation through tears. The producer's face fell with genuine sympathy. "Elena, I am so sorry. Of course you need to go to your mother. We will figure out the competition." But Marcus appeared before she could leave. The legendary producer had been watching from nearby and had heard everything. His face was serious, but calm. "Before you make any decisions," he said, "I need you to take a breath and listen to me." Elena shook her head. "There is nothing to discuss. My mother needs me." "I understand that," Marcus replied, "and you will get to her. But the show does not continue for another 3 hours. I have already spoken to the airline, and there is a flight leaving 2 hours after your scheduled performance. You can sing, then go directly to the airport. If you leave now, you will only arrive 30 minutes earlier, and you will have given up everything you have worked for." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Your mother wanted this for you. She has sacrificed her entire life so you could have this opportunity. Do you think she would want you to throw it away when you could have both?" Elena stood frozen, torn between two impossible choices. Every fiber of her being wanted to be with her mother. But she also knew that Marcus was right. Rosa had given up her own dreams so that Elena could chase hers. Walking away now, when she was so close, would break her mother's heart more than any illness could. She wiped her tears and nodded slowly. "I will perform." The next 2 hours were the longest of Elena's life. She paced backstage, praying for her mother, trying to focus on the song she needed to sing. Her team offered support, but there was little anyone could do. This was a battle she had to fight alone. When her name was called, Elena walked onto the stage carrying the weight of fear and love in equal measure. The audience had no idea what was happening, but they could sense something different in her energy. She seemed more fragile than usual, more raw. The music began, the opening notes of her mother's favorite song. Elena closed her eyes and thought about Rosa. She thought about all the times that voice had filled their small home, about the love that had shaped her entire life, and she began to sing, not just for the audience, not just for the competition, but for the woman who was fighting for her life hundreds of miles away. What emerged was the most powerful performance of Elena's life. The song poured out of Elena like water from a broken dam. Every note was drenched in emotion, every word heavy with the love and fear that consumed her heart. The audience sat in stunned silence, sensing that they were witnessing something beyond a mere performance. This was a prayer set to music, a daughter's desperate hope carried on the wings of melody. Her voice cracked at one point, not from technical failure, but from raw emotion. The imperfection made the performance even more powerful. She was not a polished singer, delivering a flawless rendition. She was a human being, vulnerable and afraid, sharing her deepest feelings with the world. When the final note faded, Elena did not wait for applause. She did not wait for the judge's comments. She simply whispered, "I love you, Mom," into the microphone and walked off stage. The audience erupted behind her, their standing ovation echoing through the stadium, but she barely heard it. Marcus was waiting backstage with a car ready to take her to the airport. "You were incredible," he said, his eyes moist with emotion. "Now go be with your mother. We will handle everything here." The flight felt endless. Elena stared out the window at the darkness below, her mind filled with fear and prayer. She thought about all the years her mother had worked, all the sacrifices, all the love. Rosa had given everything so that Elena could have a chance at her dreams. The thought that she might lose her mother now, when they were so close to seeing those dreams come true, was unbearable. Lisa was waiting at the hospital when Elena arrived. The news was not as bad as she had feared. Rosa had suffered a minor heart attack, likely caused by years of stress and overwork. She was stable now, resting in a private room, and the doctors expected her to make a full recovery. But she would need to change her lifestyle, slow down, and take better care of herself. Elena rushed to her mother's room and found Rosa sitting up in bed, looking tired but alert. When she saw her daughter, her eyes filled with tears of joy. "You came," Rosa whispered. Elena crossed the room in 3 quick steps and wrapped her arms around her mother. "Of course I came. Did you really think anything could keep me away?" They held each other for a long time, mother and daughter, their tears mixing on each other's cheeks. When they finally pulled apart, Rosa reached up to touch Elena's face. "I watched your performance," she said. "The nurses brought me a phone so I could see. You were magnificent, Mija. The most beautiful thing I have ever seen." Elena shook her head. "None of that matters. The only thing that matters is that you are okay." Rosa smiled weakly. "It matters to me. All my life, I have dreamed of this moment. Not for myself, but for you. Seeing you on that stage, hearing you sing that song, knowing that you have finally found your voice, it was worth everything. Every long night, every missed meal, every sacrifice. Worth it." The next few days were a whirlwind of hospital visits, phone calls, and impossible decisions. The finale of Rising Voices was scheduled for the following weekend, but Elena did not know if she could return. Her mother needed her. How could she think about a competition when the most important person in her life was recovering from a heart attack? But Rosa would not hear of it. Every time Elena suggested staying, her mother firmly refused. "You are going back," Rosa insisted. "You are going to win that competition, and you are going to start your new life. That is what I want. That is what I have always wanted." The doctors supported Rosa's decision, assuring Elena that her mother was out of danger and would be well cared for. Lisa promised to stay by Rosa's side every moment Elena was gone. The nurses, who had all become fans after watching Elena's viral performances, added their encouragement. Finally, reluctantly, Elena agreed to return for the finale. The night of the final competition arrived. 3 contestants remained: Elena, Veronica, and Derek. Each would perform twice, with the winner determined by a combination of judges' scores and audience votes. The entire country was watching, waiting to see who would be crowned the first Rising Voices champion. Veronica performed first, delivering a technically stunning performance that showcased her years of training. She had taken Elena's earlier advice to heart, allowing more vulnerability into her singing. The judges praised her growth and predicted great things for her future. Derek went second, bringing his unique blend of soulful rock to the stage. His charisma and energy were infectious, and the audience loved every moment. The judges called him a natural entertainer who would have a long career in music. Then it was Elena's turn. She walked onto the stage wearing a simple white dress that Lisa had helped her choose. No elaborate costume, no dramatic makeup, just Elena as she was. The audience greeted her with thunderous applause, many of them already on their feet. The host introduced a surprise. On the massive screen behind Elena, a video connection appeared. There was Rosa, sitting up in her hospital bed, surrounded by nurses and friends, watching her daughter about to perform on national television. The audience gasped, then cheered. Elena turned to see her mother's face, and felt tears spring to her eyes. "Sing for me, Mija," Rosa called out, her voice wavering but strong. "Show them who you are." Elena nodded, wiped her tears, and turned back to face the audience. The music began. A final original song she had written just days ago, in her mother's hospital room, about gratitude and love and the light that guides us home. Her voice rose into the air like a phoenix taking flight. Every note was crystal clear, every word infused with meaning. She sang about the journey she had taken, from invisible girl to this stage, and about the woman who had made it all possible. She sang about fear conquered and dreams realized. She sang about hope. The stadium fell completely silent. 3,000 people held their breath as Elena's voice washed over them like a warm wave. On the screen behind her, Rosa wept openly, her hand pressed to her heart. In the judges' seats, all three sat motionless, transfixed by what they were witnessing. Elena built toward the climax, her voice soaring higher and higher until it seemed to touch the heavens themselves. The final note rang out with pure, undiluted power, filling every corner of the stadium, reaching through television screens into millions of homes across the country. And then silence. For 5 full seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The world itself seemed to pause. Then the stadium exploded. Every single person was on their feet, screaming, crying, applauding with everything they had. The standing ovation went on for nearly 5 minutes, refusing to stop no matter how many times the host tried to regain control. The judges were unanimous in their praise. The harsh judge, who had once told Elena to consider other careers, called it the greatest performance he had ever witnessed on any stage. The female judge could not speak at all, too overcome with emotion. And Marcus simply walked to the stage, embraced Elena like a father embracing his daughter, and whispered, "You did it." When the votes were finally tallied and the results announced, there was no surprise. Elena Martinez, the shy girl from Millbrook, who had been mocked for her simple tune, was crowned the first champion of Rising Voices. The confetti fell like golden rain as Elena stood on stage, trophy in hand, tears streaming down her face. On the screen behind her, Rosa was celebrating with the nurses, their cheers audible even through the video connection. In the audience, Lisa and Derek were jumping up and down with joy. Even Veronica, who had finished second, approached Elena with genuine congratulations and respect. But for Elena, the greatest moment came when she returned home the following week. Rosa had been released from the hospital and was waiting in their small apartment. The same apartment where Elena had sung in secret for so many years. When Elena walked through the door, trophy in hand, mother and daughter embraced and wept and laughed all at once. "We did it," Elena whispered. "We actually did it." Rosa pulled back to look at her daughter, pride shining in her tired eyes. "You did it, Mija. I just loved you. Everything else was you." The months that followed brought changes Elena could never have imagined. Marcus signed her to a record deal and became her mentor and friend. Her first album, featuring both original songs and covers of her mother's favorites, debuted at #1. Critics praised her authenticity and emotional depth, calling her a voice for the voiceless. But the most important change was in Rosa's life. Elena used her earnings to move her mother out of the cramped apartment and into a comfortable house with a garden. Rosa would never have to work 2 jobs again. She could finally rest, finally enjoy the fruits of her daughter's success. On the day they moved into the new house, Elena found her mother standing in the kitchen, humming an old familiar tune. The same tune she had hummed in their old kitchen through all those years of struggle and sacrifice. "Some things do not change," Rosa said with a smile. Elena wrapped her arms around her mother from behind and joined in the humming. They stood there together, 2 women who had faced darkness and found light, their voices blending in perfect harmony. The shy girl who had once been mocked for her simple tune had ignited the world. But she had never done it alone. Love had been her light, and love would always guide her home.